My parents threw a huge party for my brother's engagement. When I opened my gift, it was a notice for my upcoming court hearing. "You should be grateful," my mom smirked. I grabbed my stuff and walked out without a word. A week later, they called. Frantic. "Please, we didn't mean it. Hi everyone. I'm 27M, and let's just say my family dynamic is complicated. I'll start by saying this isn't some overnight drama. It's the result of years, decades, really, of quiet favoritism, subtle digs, unspoken expectations, and a whole lot of pretending things were fine when they weren't. I didn't grow up in a house where people screamed at each other or threw things. Instead, it was the kind of house where silence could be louder than any shout, and smiles could be sharper than knives. I'm the youngest of two. My older brother, Silas, is 30. To my parents, Angela and Martin, he's always been the star. From the time we were kids, it was clear Silas could do no wrong. He had this natural charm about him, one of those people who just knows how to say the right thing, wear the right clothes, make the right impression. Teachers loved him. Family friends adored him. Even when he messed up, and he messed up plenty, there was always an excuse, always a justification. Silas is just spirited. He's got a strong personality. He'll land on his feet. Meanwhile, I was the responsible one, the quiet one. I followed the rules, kept my head down, did well in school, got into a decent university, and built a stable career in IT. But in our house, stability wasn't exciting. It didn't turn heads. It wasn't something you toasted to at family dinners. I used to brush it off, tell myself I didn't need their approval. And maybe, for a while, I really believed that. But when you spend your entire life watching your brother get showered with praise for doing the bare minimum while you're met with silence, or worse, criticism for doing everything right, it starts to wear you down. My relationship with my parents became more distant after I moved out at 23. I bought a small condo in a quiet area, about 30 minutes away from their house. I visited for holidays, sometimes stopped by for birthdays or Sunday lunch, but that was about it. Every time I was there, I felt like a visitor, an outsider. Even when I brought homemade food or offered to fix their router or update their devices, things Silas would never think to do, it barely earned a nod. Silas, on the other hand, practically lived at their place. Despite having his own apartment, he was always there, eating their food, borrowing their car, using their backyard as if it were his own. My parents acted like it was sweet. Like it was nice, he stayed so connected. They never once mentioned that he was well into his 20s, coasting without paying rent, while I was budgeting to afford my mortgage and saving for the future. Anyway, the real story starts about 2 months ago, when Silas announced he was getting engaged. The news dropped into the family group chat like a bomb. My mom was over the moon. She immediately called me, not to tell me the news, but to ask if I could help set up some decorations for a surprise engagement dinner they were throwing the following weekend. I didn't even know he had proposed. I said sure, because that's what I do. I show up. I help, even when it feels thankless. I showed up early that day, and the house was buzzing. My mom had transformed the backyard into something out of a magazine. Twinkling lights were strung across the patio. There were white and gold balloons tied to every chair, and a huge banner with Silas and Leona written in elegant cursive hung over the back fence. They had a catering truck parked outside and hired 2 servers to pass around little hors d'oeuvres I couldn't even pronounce. It wasn't just a dinner, it was an event. As usual, I took a quiet corner and made myself useful. I helped string up the lights, carried folding chairs, and set the tables. No one really acknowledged it. My dad gave me a short nod when I finished moving a cooler full of drinks, but that was it. When guests started to arrive, I felt like I was fading into the background. Old family friends I hadn't seen in years walked right past me to hug Silas. A few asked me, "So, what are you doing these days?" with that glazed look that told me they didn't actually care what the answer was. One even mistook me for one of the staff. I didn't bother correcting them. Silas and Leona finally arrived, and there was this whole big entrance with music and clapping and cheers. My mom teared up. My dad raised a glass. Silas ate it all up, flashing his perfect grin, acting surprised even though the whole thing was clearly planned. Leona looked genuinely happy. I'll give her that. She came over and hugged me, thanked me for coming, and asked if I wanted to sit with them. I said no thanks and found a spot near the back with a view of the whole thing. Watching from a distance had become second nature to me. Then, sometime after the main meal was served, my mom got up and tapped her glass with a fork. The crowd hushed. She stood there, glowing like it was her big night, and started talking about love, family, and how proud she was of Silas. Then she said something I didn't expect. We also have something for our other son, she said, who's made some big decisions of his own lately. I blinked. What? People turned to look at me. I wasn't sure what to do. I stood there awkwardly as she walked toward me with an envelope in her hand. A thick one. My stomach twisted. Something felt off. I didn't know why, but I had the sense I was being watched not with pride, but with amusement. Like I was the punchline to a joke I didn't know I was part of. My mom smiled as she handed it to me. We wanted to support you in your next chapter, she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. I opened it, and everything stopped. Inside the envelope was a stack of papers. Legal papers. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. The text was dense, printed on heavy white paper, and the heading had that cold, official font I usually only saw on government forms. I flipped through the first few pages, scanning without processing, until my eyes locked onto a sentence that made everything go quiet around me. Notice of civil claim filed on behalf of Angela and Martin Colgrave. I read it again. I looked up. My mom was still smiling. It wasn't a warm smile. It wasn't even fake nice. It was knowing. Like she was expecting this moment to land differently. Like she thought I'd thank her. My fingers tightened around the envelope. I turned back to the papers and started to read. Really read. They were suing me. They were suing me for what they called long-standing financial obligations incurred during the period of dependency. In simpler terms, they were demanding I pay them back for my upbringing. Housing, food, school costs, medical bills, even clothes. There was a line about uncompensated emotional labor that made my vision blur for a second. They had itemized everything, page after page of carefully calculated figures. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My ears were ringing. All around us, people were whispering. Leona looked completely stunned. Silas was frozen mid-smile, glancing between me and the papers like he'd just realized something had gone terribly off-script. I finally spoke. My voice felt far away, like it belonged to someone else. What is this? My mom's smile didn't falter. It's just a formality, she said, her voice sugar-sweet. You've always talked about standing on your own 2 feet. This is just a way to make things even. I stared at her. Even? As if I hadn't already spent my entire adult life working twice as hard for half the acknowledgement. As if I hadn't already gone out of my way to respect their boundaries, show up when asked, help them with anything they needed, and ask for nothing in return. And now, they were suing me? In front of a crowd? At a party? I looked at my dad, hoping stupidly that maybe this had gone too far even for him. That maybe he would step in and say this was ridiculous. But he just stood there, silent, hands folded in front of him. He couldn't even meet my eyes. That hurt more than I expected. I could feel people watching, waiting to see how I'd react. Some looked uncomfortable. A few looked confused. One woman in the back was actually laughing softly, like she thought it was a joke. I folded the papers carefully and slid them back into the envelope. I didn't rush. I didn't make a scene, but I felt something inside me close. Like a door I had kept open for years finally swinging shut. Without a word, I turned and walked out of the backyard. No one followed me. Not my mom. Not my dad. Not even Silas. I drove home in silence. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat in the parking garage under my building for a long time, hands still on the wheel, staring at nothing. The envelope sat in the passenger seat like it was made of stone. I didn't answer their calls that night. Or the next. Days turned into weeks. Eventually, I got an email from a lawyer, their lawyer, asking for a response by the end of the month. I didn't reply. I didn't have to. I already knew exactly what I was going to do. A few weeks passed. No word from them. Then one day, out of nowhere, I received a call from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. I listened to it twice. It was my dad. He sounded not like himself. Shaky, uncertain, like he had just realized the weight of what they'd done. "Please," he said. "We didn't mean it like that. It was your mother's idea. We didn't think you'd take it seriously." I didn't call back. It had been a few weeks since I'd gotten that voicemail from my dad. I hadn't replied. I didn't even think about it much at first. But as time passed, I started to feel something build up inside me. It wasn't just the anger. It was the realization that this wasn't just about a few legal papers or a poorly timed family dinner. It was about years of being overlooked, disrespected, and treated like a background character in my own life. The more I thought about it, the more I knew I couldn't just let it slide. I wasn't going to cave. They wanted me to prove something to them. Well, now it was time for me to make them prove their worth to me. The first thing I did was get my own lawyer. I wasn't sure where this would go, but I knew I needed someone who would be able to navigate the mess my parents had created. After a long consultation, we decided to file a countersuit for emotional distress and financial manipulation. The lawyer agreed that I had a strong case. It was clear this wasn't a mere misunderstanding, it was a deliberate move on their part to hurt me. They wanted money, yes, but they also wanted control. And I wasn't about to let that happen. I remember the first time I spoke to my lawyer about the counterclaim. I was sitting at my kitchen table, the papers scattered in front of me, and I realized something. I had spent most of my life trying to win their approval. Whether it was doing the right thing, being responsible, making the right decisions. But now I was going to take control back. It wasn't about money. It wasn't even about getting back at them in the way they might have expected. No, I wasn't going to make a scene. I wasn't going to yell or scream. I was going to hit them where it hurt, their precious reputation, the one they cared about more than anything else. I'd show them that they couldn't just walk all over me anymore. Over the next few weeks, I gathered everything I could to build my case. Texts, emails, documents. Anything that proved how much they had taken from me, how their actions had affected my mental health, my career, and my personal life. My lawyer helped me structure everything. She was clear that we'd have to approach this carefully, but that there was enough evidence to make a strong case. Once everything was ready, we filed. The news hit my parents about a week later. I'd made sure to make it public. The filing wasn't private, and the last thing my parents wanted was for their friends, colleagues, and the people they'd spent so much time impressing to know that their son was taking them to court. And then, the call started. I didn't answer at first. I didn't want to engage. But one afternoon, about 2 weeks after the filing, I found myself standing in my kitchen with my phone in my hand. I'd been avoiding my mom's calls for days, but this time, something told me I had to pick up. "Hello," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Is this a joke?" My mom's voice was shaking, not in anger, but in desperation. "We never meant it to go this far. You know that, don't you?" I leaned against the counter, taking a deep breath before speaking. "You made it go this far, Mom. I didn't want any of this. But you pushed me into a corner. I've tried for years to make you proud, to do things the way you wanted. And all I got in return was manipulation and disrespect." There was silence on the other end for a moment. I could practically hear her scrambling for the right words. "Don't be ridiculous," she finally said, her voice tight. "This is not the way you repay your family. This is not the way you treat us." I wasn't backing down now. "No, this is how you treat me," I said. "You and Dad have always put Silas above me, and I've always had to take what I could get. But now, I'm done. I'm not playing this game anymore." I could hear her breathing heavily, probably trying to hold it together. "You're making a huge mistake," she said, her voice low, almost pleading. "Please, let's talk about this. Let's fix it. You don't want to go through with this. It's going to tear this family apart." "Funny," I said. I thought that was already happening. I hung up before she could respond. That night, I felt nothing. It wasn't relief. It wasn't joy. It was just calm. It was like I had finally exhaled after holding my breath for so long. I had taken my first step toward doing something for myself, something that wasn't about trying to please anyone. The next few days were tense. My parents didn't contact me directly again, but I knew they were talking to other family members. I started to get messages, people I hadn't heard from in years, asking if it was true, if I was really suing my parents. Some were concerned, others were just curious. A few people told me I was being dramatic or overreacting. But the thing was, those weren't the people I cared about anymore. They weren't the ones who had been there when I was the one constantly giving, bending over backward, and getting nothing in return. And as for Silas, he didn't reach out either. I didn't expect him to. He was too busy enjoying the spotlight of his own engagement. He had always been good at pretending everything was fine, pretending he didn't see the cracks in the family. He wasn't about to change now. Days turned into weeks, and things between my parents and me stayed silent. No one came to me with any apologies. No one tried to make amends. They didn't realize that the longer they waited, the worse it was going to get. Their reputation, everything they'd spent so much time building, was starting to crumble. It wasn't long before they realized they'd made a huge mistake. I could almost feel it in the air, like the slow, creeping awareness that they had crossed a line they couldn't undo. Then, one day, I got another voicemail from my dad. I didn't listen to it immediately. I knew what was coming. They were panicking now. They had underestimated how far I was willing to go. When I finally played the message, his voice was frantic. "Please, we didn't mean it like that. We just wanted you to understand. We didn't want it to go this far. Please, we're sorry." I listened to the message a few times, my expression unreadable. The apology wasn't for me. It wasn't for what they had done. It was for the trouble they were in. And that's when I realized something: this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. It had been a few more weeks since my dad's frantic voicemail, and I had to admit, I had expected this call. They thought they could wriggle out of it by apologizing. They thought if they played the victim card hard enough, I'd fold, and everything would go back to normal. That's how it always went, right? I'd been the one who gave in, over and over again. But not this time. I didn't reply to his voicemail. Instead, I waited. Then, the letter came. It was from my lawyer, and when I saw the envelope, my stomach dropped. I didn't know what to expect anymore, but this was different. This wasn't an email or a phone call. This was real. I opened it carefully, my hand steady, and read the contents. The letter was from their lawyer, requesting a meeting to discuss a settlement. A settlement. I almost laughed. They didn't want to go to court. They didn't want their dirty laundry aired out in public any more than I did, but they had pushed me too far. I didn't need their settlement. But the lawyer inside me realized this was a moment. They were finally acknowledging that they were in deep trouble. I responded in kind, agreeing to a meeting. But I made it clear, this wasn't about money. It wasn't even about the legal case anymore. This was about making them face the reality of what they'd done. When the day of the meeting came, I walked into the conference room with a calm that surprised even me. My lawyer was beside me, prepared to handle the legal side. The Colgraves walked in a few minutes later. My mom's face was tight, her smile was absent, and my dad, who had once been so sure of everything, looked like he had aged 10 years in the past few weeks. The weight of their mistakes had finally caught up with them. They sat down across from me, the tension palpable. My mom opened her mouth to speak, but I held up my hand. I wasn't here to listen to their excuses anymore. I wasn't here to hear about how they didn't mean it or how this wasn't the way they wanted things to turn out. I was done being their emotional punching bag, done trying to be the child who forgave them at every turn. This time, I was the one who was in control. "Here's the thing," I started, voice steady. "I don't want money. I don't want anything material from this. What I want is for you to understand that everything that's happened over the years, wasn't just hurtful. It was cruel. And I want you to acknowledge that." My mom's face flushed. "We never meant to hurt you," she said quickly, trying to reclaim control of the conversation. "But I wasn't having it. You did. You took advantage of me for years," I said. "You've always seen me as a tool to get what you wanted. I wasn't allowed to have my own life, my own dreams. You manipulated me into taking care of you while you pushed me aside at every opportunity. They sat in silence. My dad looked like he wanted to speak, but I could see the resignation in his eyes. This wasn't a situation where they could make me feel guilty anymore. Not when the truth was out in the open. I want an official public apology, I continued, and I want this to be made clear to everyone who's ever assumed you were a perfect family. I want them to know what really happened. I want everyone who's ever treated me like the villain in this story to understand the truth. That's the price of your apology. Not money, not possessions. I'm not going to let you walk away from this unscathed. They didn't say anything right away. My mom's eyes flicked toward the floor, then to my dad, then back to me. Her hands were folded in her lap, so tightly her knuckles had turned white. The expression on her face was almost unreadable, part disbelief, part wounded pride, but there was something else behind it too. Fear. Not the dramatic, teary-eyed kind she used to fake when trying to guilt me, but a quiet, dawning realization that the roles had finally reversed. She wasn't in control anymore. She hadn't expected me to set terms. She certainly hadn't expected those terms to involve making their behavior public. In her mind, apologies were whispered in private, if given at all, and then swept under the rug where no one had to acknowledge them again. She hadn't prepared for consequences. For a long time, I don't think she believed consequences applied to her at all. But this wasn't a suggestion. It wasn't a conversation where they could pivot or twist my words into something more convenient. This was a demand. And by the look on her face, I knew she realized that. My dad finally broke the silence, his voice hoarse and a little cracked, like he hadn't used it much in days. "You can't do this," he said, slowly, deliberately, as though he still hoped I might reconsider. "It'll ruin everything we've built." I let the words hang in the air before I answered. I wanted him to feel the weight of what he was really saying. "Everything you've built?" I repeated, keeping my voice calm. "You mean the image, the illusion of being the perfect family, the illusion that you're generous, loving parents who always had their children's best interests in mind." He didn't respond. His jaw clenched. "You built your reputation on manipulation," I said, more firmly now. "On guilt-tripping, controlling, and exploiting people to serve your needs. You taught me that my feelings were inconvenient, that my successes only mattered if they benefited you. You painted me as difficult any time I wanted something different from what you planned for me." I turned my eyes back to my mom. "You pushed me into roles I never wanted and made me believe I owed you everything. You made me feel like I was selfish for even dreaming of independence. But that's over." The room was quiet again, except for the soft sound of someone shifting in their seat, maybe the other lawyer. The silence was heavy and long. I could feel their discomfort growing, like a kettle about to boil. My mom opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. Maybe she was realizing that no amount of protest would change the fact that the people around us would find out, that they would finally see behind the mask. "I'm not here for money," I said, voice low but steady. "This isn't about a payout or revenge. It's about truth. It's about reclaiming what you tried to take from me," my voice. "My right to be seen and heard and not twisted into something convenient for you." My lawyer passed a folder across the table. Inside was the drafted statement. Not a vague half apology, not the kind of polished PR note they probably would have preferred, but an honest and specific admission of what they had done. The way they had emotionally manipulated me. How they had involved me in financial matters without my knowledge or consent. The way they excluded me from family decisions, but used my name and trust to further their image. The statement would be shared privately with everyone involved, relatives, mutual friends, former mentors, and publicly posted on a family group page that my mom used to update constantly with photos of holiday dinners and proud announcements about Silas. There would be no deleting comments, no backpedaling. That was part of the deal. They stared at the folder like it was a trap, like signing it would open a door they'd never be able to close. And maybe it would. There was a long pause. Then, finally, slowly, they both nodded. The weeks that followed were intense. The apology went live. The reaction was immediate. Some relatives reached out to say they'd always suspected something was wrong. A few apologized to me for never asking questions, for assuming my distance was just me being moody or ungrateful. Others didn't say much at all, but I saw them leave the family group quietly, silently choosing a side without drama. Of course, not everyone believed the apology. There were still those who clung to the version of my parents they had known for decades, the ones who gave generous gifts at weddings and hosted elaborate family gatherings. But the narrative had changed. There was a crack in the mask now, and it wasn't going away. I got a message from Silas a few days after the apology was shared. Short, cold. "I don't know what you're doing," he wrote, "but you've changed. You're not the same person who used to beg for approval. I don't like it." I stared at that message for a long moment. He was right, in a way. I had changed. I wasn't the same person who once helped plan his engagement party, who used to offer to proofread his speeches or pick up errands for Mom because she didn't trust anyone else. I had stopped being the reliable background character in everyone else's lives. I had stepped forward, and some people didn't like it. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. My parents called a few times after that. Once to ask if I'd consider making a new post clarifying some of the more harsh-sounding language in the statement. Another time to say they'd received fewer holiday invitations than usual this year. I let both calls go to voicemail. I didn't owe them comfort anymore. Months passed. I poured myself into my work, into friendships that actually made me feel safe and seen. I reconnected with people I'd lost touch with because of the chaos my family had created around me. Slowly, I felt something unfamiliar start to settle in my chest, peace. No, I didn't get the perfect closure. I didn't get a tearful confession or a grand gesture of reconciliation. My parents never really changed, not in the way I used to hope they would. But I got something better. I got out. I got clarity. And I got to walk away knowing that, for once, I didn't bend. I didn't play the role they wrote for me. I stood up, and I told the truth. I wasn't their child anymore. I wasn't their scapegoat. I wasn't their fixer, their shield, their excuse.